Thank you, Pekka. So good morning. So I was looking at the speaker list, and I was figuring out that as a funder, I should be the voice of the society. So this will be the voice of society today. I will try to put the perspective of the science in society, and in this talk, I will first put my views on why have we ended up in this transition phase as science is in today, and then deduce some words about trust, society's trust in science and in scientists. I think that is crucial and it's very important. As you can see from the title, my talk will then be a bit broader than looking at data citation. Another reason for talking about the society is of course also that in NordForsk we haven't yet started to utilize data citations. This is still in early. We are talking about open data, open science in NordForsk, but as a funder we haven't taken this into account yet. So yeah, let me then. So I also has been in science, and I don't know how much. And anyone doesn't know what NordForsk is? Hands up. Then I can say it in one sentence. We are a platform for Nordic research collaboration. Then we go on to the next one. So I want to go back to when I was a student, and there was this good old days in pre-2000, you know, when everything was good. We only had citation of our publications. That was a jolly good time. You know, everything was easy. We could start counting. I can say, okay, I have this and this many publications. I can even be a bit advanced and say, you know, I have 3 publications in a top-level journal, and people can say, oh, yeah, good. That's very good. But, you know, and people looking from outside at the research community could see this kind of harmonic, curiosity-driven society. It was self-sustained in many ways, and occasionally it would actually talk also with the society and say a professor with a grave look will say something important about environment or climate, and you know that this is terrible or this is very good or whatever he did. Yeah. But you know, being in science, we know also that it was not like that. And giving a presentation, I always like to refer to one of my favorite philosophers, and that's Paul Feyerabend. And he really puts it very nice about this, why are the scientists do what the scientists are doing? And I like his quote that the scientists, they have an aim and it remains stable, mostly, but it can very easily also change. It can be a result of an argument, it can be because they are bored, this can be a kind of a dialogue, or even impress the mistress. So there are many reasons for how the science has developed, I have to say that. And if you haven't read Paul Feyerabend, I would say that it's very, very good reading. And actually this subtitle is about, you know, about more kind of disorder of science than the order of science. So recommended. Okay, so I also come from, you know, Earth system science, climate, environmental science. And I did actually generate a lot of data. And I could just refer to Sarah's pictures because that was the way we did it. You know, you went to the laboratory, you extracted the data, you put it on tape, and we had a suitcase full of tape coming back to the laboratory and put it on the local hard disk. That was how we did it. And the names were just as useful as Sarah's were referring to. But I also did some practical work developing a numerical model. And while being a student, you know, there were these rumors about some cheating here and there. Of course, always in a different department than yourself was working. And we heard there was actually these professors that were stealing the IDs of the students. So there was some kind of, also before we know that there has been cheating, there has been some kind of reuse of data, some fixing of data to make things look good, or even, as most people have done, I guess, under-reporting of data that didn't quite fit, which is, I think, it's quite usual. So, I think, you know, if you look at this, so this was the situation, you know, also for me, even if I did the kind of a lot of my time was actually for generating the data. The data was kind of, you know, secondary or tertiary of your research. It was just there. It was a necessity. While the publications were the assets that we were selling and that we were using. Okay, but then something changed, and the change is not only the society, and it's also in the university system, and also by the funders. Because, you know, after a while, there started to be this kind of number of appearances in media, dissemination to the public. So there was this starting to be internal push for starting to look at the value of what the scientists were doing. And it was value for the society, not only value for the scientists themselves. And we also had some other kind of values which were in the universities, which we also see today. Is how good are you as a teacher, for instance? And actually in some universities this matters when you are hired. It can also matter when you are getting these credits from your colleagues. But this varies a lot between different universities. So there is it's not a set or fixed or a uniform system. It's a bit random depending on what laboratory or university you're working on. But, you know, eventually it had to be, you know, exposed cheating. And being kind, you know, I only took a Norwegian newspaper, Swedish newspaper, and a Danish, not a Finnish. Because, of course, in Finland this also has happened. There is actually cheating going on in science. And I would say, well, I called it the arrival of winter, but I would say, in a way, science lost its virginity in early 2000. Or we knew it inside the science business, but for the society and for the general public, so science lost its virginity. People are cheating to get, you know, professorship, to be famous, to get funding, to get money. How is it possible? So there is a broken trust. And speaking for the society, I would say we have to regain this trust again. So now I'm actually getting now towards the data citations. So what has happened? Well, you know, there has been an immensely increase in number of scientists. There is a declining availability of money. There is also this kind of less respect in society, so you have to really show off some very good or spectacular science results. So, again, talking for the society, then what do they demand then? Well, they will want to know what is our money used for. So they want transparency. They want to have an accountability for how the money is spent. Is it spent in the best possible way? Is it trustworthy? Do the society get anything back at all? Which is could be a kind of a bit painful point in many areas of science. And if you look at what the scientists themselves, they say this is from nature. You know, is there a reproducibility crisis, as Sarah also touched on, and it was referred yesterday. There is indeed a reproducibility crisis, and that is, if it's bad within science, it's even worse in society. And we really know that society, there is a less and less trust in science and in professors. You know, if a politician says something, like in the Progress Party in Norway, for instance, stating that there is a political statement that there is no man-made climate change, then the professor can stand up and say, but all the evidence say, and you can ask the public, and they will say, well, you know, we believe the politician. And how can that be? And so there is we have a trust issue. As a funder, of course, we also have, well, not the same problem with trust, I would say that, but we also need to go and explain to the policymakers, to society, how good science is doing for society. So we also need some similar kind of measures. There is another thing also in the development. Since the World War II, you know, we have had, as I see it, 3 kind of phases of this kind of contract the science has had with society. After the World War, they had this Marshall aid from the US, helping, you know, the Western world to take a stand in scientific development, which was demarking it from the Soviet Union, from the eastern side, which was a bit gloomy and difficult. So there was a lot of building up competence in the Western world. Then we had the second phase in the 60s and 70s, which were more for the society and building society for technology development, building knowledge that could really have economic growth, giving us prosperity. But then again, we have this kind of third wave, where there is more of these grand societal challenges. That's where we are now. So we should, or part of the science should be done to serve the society. Okay, so that is also an outer pressure for what science should be and should do. Science should also be done to serve the society and solve the grand societal challenges. And you know, from climate, for instance, this is kind of obvious. We have water shortage, food provision and everything. And of course, the obvious one is this e-infrastructure, you know, making it possible for us to actually make everything open, to access everything, to see what is done. And also then any citizen can go out there and see what is not done, but not because they understand it maybe, but they can see that it's done or if it's useful. Okay, so let me then go to the kind of the next part. Now I try to point to some of these internal external forces that has put, you know, this society, this science society in a kind of transition as we are in now. I think there is a lot of arms and legs all over. We don't know really how to handle it. Should all data be open? Why? How long should it be open, etc. And probably the answer is probably not everything should be open, but we have to understand why, and we have to understand for whom, etc. So, in a way, you know, I try to be humble and say that funders, we are kind of a mediator between the scientists and the funders. We are standing in the middle and we are collaborating with the scientists to get more money for science, but it has to be excellent, it has to be appropriate, it has to serve the society, and we are also talking with the policymakers to point out that, hey, here we have very good scientists, these are very good groups, we need to fund and keep these groups going because they are really on an international top level. And in that process, you know, there are transparency, it's openness, open science, open publication, open data, all these demands which is coming up. One thing that we are concerned with in this kind of situation is that it's easy now when we have all this, the gender issues, there has to be openness, there has to be a data management plan. We have to make certain also that the scientist doesn't lose the view of the goals, why they are doing science. So there are so many demands coming in, so that is also something that we are concerned with. So when we are then launching calls, for instance, and funding, you know, there has to be open publications, as you know, when it's practical. We have these gold and green standards, data management plan, open data. There is not that much attention to the co-part, the co-creation, the co-citizenship. But it was also mentioned in the question said about the interdisciplinarity, and that is in a part this kind of, you know, including society or stakeholders in the view. But in a way, I think the co-word is fine because it really puts attention to the open science as such, even if you probably don't really know exactly what it is. Okay, just a short thing also, since I'm talking for the society, I also should say some short words about can the society use the data and how can they use it. And actually it's very difficult. It's very difficult for the society and the ordinary citizen to use data. It's not sufficient, even if the data has a metadata and is well described. You know, how can a farmer use, you know, make a good use of climate service data? That is a question, and it's not always obvious, or it's very seldom obvious how good data are created for a certain user group. And we know that also from the climate challenge. We have been, telling politics for 20 years that this is really needed to be taken care of. There is a warming coming. Humans are an essential part of that, but nothing has happened, or actually very little. Well, we have the Paris Agreement, of course, last year. The other thing is that there has to be data somewhere where we can trust it. There has to be a sustainability, long-term sustainability. And I know also the scientists themselves are very concerned with that. So this is not unknown at all. Okay, so open science as a, I would not say a research method, but as a way to do research can actually be a part and help science and scientists to start to restore trust in the society, I think. We can point to much more of the value for money which is put in the different parts of where you do the processes, from defining the science questions until you have the publications. But in there you also have data which can be made available, and you can have the data citations. So why to measure impact? Well, I don't think the scientists, there is no choice. If we are going to still get money, or that is kind of putting it a bit on the edge, but if we are still to get money for science, science has to show its worth. And one of that worth can be data citations, availability for data. I don't know. I don't know how important it will be. And actually I think that it is very dependent upon how the university and institutions themselves are putting it out. I think that it is internally in the science society that this will determine if it will be useful or if it will be valuable or not. Because it probably should be more or less as important as citations for publications. And me as a funder or the funder organization, we don't have much control of that at all, actually. This is the institutions and the university themselves. So, to wrap up, I guess I have a couple of more minutes. Okay, so we have, or the scientist and the science society has to show their worth. It's very difficult to measure impact, and maybe data citation could be one kind of proxy for impact for society. I don't know. We have to see, and actually there is a lot of work on impact and how to measure it. As we all know by now, the demand out there is that open data, open publication, there's a must. There's no way out of that. We know it. There has to be a reasonable cost to it. There is this debate now going on how expensive it is to publish data to the publishers. No data, I mean articles to publishers, some of the high impact ones. It has really increased the last years. But it's also a kind of cost issue. How expensive should it be to do science? Like overhead, how is it okay to have overheads which are several $100%? But that's another discussion. I think that the funders, like myself, we could have a mediator role in this, helping, showing the value of the science and the science done, both to the society and to the policymakers. So, as the title was, the kind of this open science and transparency, they are important. But I think it still remains to be seen, is it sufficient to kind of restore the trust to science, as I think, which is needed after this, I would say, loss of virginity earlier. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Jostein for kind of nice view of the Nordic and for policy making view of science and society. Okay, so I think we have time for one or two questions.
If any.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Thank you. I just want to ask one question about the previous slide where you said that there has to be a longer wait for exotic matrix. What do you meant by exotic matrix?
That are the metrics where you try to measure impacts, for instance, the kind of degree of innovation or uptake in policy, this kind of, not the secondary but the tertiary kind of deduction from how valuable science is. So that is what I mean by exotic. It's kind of a bit undefined measures that we are trying to use to show value of science to society.
Okay,
Yes.
but this is not used by NordForsk so far?
No, that is why I called it exotic also,
Okay.
because it's kind of a bit, you know, it will be used whenever it is suitable, but we don't call it exotic, of course not.
Okay,
it was
good.
kind of more of a wording.
Okay,
To
thank
make
you.
it exotic, yes.
Okay, we could have another question if somebody has. Yeah. So I could actually ask one. So now, NordForsk is kind of very keen on following the development of open research and open science in the Nordic countries, and there was this report on status. So I'm not so well familiar with the activities and also. So how much of kind of the programmatic work is that kind of? I mean, you can have sticks and carrots. I mean, you can have a stick that every project has to have the data management plan and blah blah blah. Is there anything on sort of the carrot side of activities?
Well, yes, there is not a big carrot, but we have started some pilots for existing projects to start, you know, making some of the results and some of the data open and explaining how they're doing it and what barriers they will meet. So there are some new money into it, to put it that way. So small carrot, yes, but there are not many carrots in this, and it is, we as a funder, we don't want to go in to tell the scientists how to store or where to store anything, but we are trying to provide some money for them to choose where to store.
But you have your pilots, and then you kind of distribute information and
yes. So we are trying to show how some groups are doing it. Yes, that we are doing. Yes.
Okay, thanks. So, okay, so let's thank Jostein once again.